Ulric Sanders was 42 years old and worked as a senior compliance analyst at Summit Harbor Logistics in downtown Chicago. Most people in the building believed he was forgettable, a quiet man, a back-office employee who spent more time with spreadsheets than people. He drove a 12-year-old Honda Accord, ate lunch alone at the same deli 3 blocks from the office, carried a worn leather briefcase with a frayed handle. What they didn't know was that members of the board of directors had been speaking with him in secret for months. At 4:37 p.m. on a cold Friday afternoon, 2 security officers stopped beside his desk. One held out a hand for his employee badge, while dozens of eyes turned toward him. Then the officer quietly said 4 words. "Sir, come with us." "Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country and your local time in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about quiet people, hidden truths, workplace betrayals, and justice that arrives at exactly the right moment, make sure you subscribe to the channel." Now let's get back to Ulric Sanders and the Friday afternoon that everyone thought ended his career. The first thing most people noticed about Ulric Sanders was how little there was to notice. That was exactly why they missed everything that mattered. For 17 years, Ulric had worked in compliance and operational auditing. He had spent most of those years inside office buildings where louder people collected promotions, larger offices, and recognition plaques. Ulric collected records. He collected timestamps, he collected discrepancies, and sometimes, if a person was careless enough, he collected the truth. Summit Harbor Logistics occupied 24 floors of a steel and glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. The company managed freight transportation across 48 states, moved nearly $20 billion in goods annually, and employed more than 8,000 people nationwide. Most employees never saw beyond their own department. Ulric saw everything, not because of authority, because compliance touched every corner of the company. Contracts passed through compliance. Vendor approvals passed through compliance. Risk assessments passed through compliance. People often forgot that, until they needed someone to explain where the money went. Ulric arrived every morning at 6:45 a.m., not because anyone required it, because he preferred working before the noise started. The security guards knew him by name. The cleaning staff knew him by name. The executive team rarely noticed him at all. He parked his aging Honda Accord in the same garage section every day, level 3, spot 314. Then he stopped at Harbor Deli and bought black coffee and an egg sandwich. Always the same order, always the same cashier, always the same receipt folded neatly into his jacket pocket. There was comfort in routine. There was also protection. People rarely paid attention to a man who never demanded attention, which was why nobody realized how much information flowed through his desk. On the 21st floor, executives often discussed strategy as though compliance employees were furniture. Background objects, necessary but unimportant. Ulric never corrected them. He simply listened. 3 months earlier, something unusual had appeared in one of the quarterly operational reports. At first glance, it was nothing. A transportation cost increase, 7%. Perfectly explainable. Fuel prices fluctuated. Routes changed. Markets shifted. No one would question 7%. Ulric almost didn't. Then he noticed something else. The increase appeared in multiple regions simultaneously. Different vendors, different routes, different managers. Yet somehow the numbers moved in almost identical patterns. That bothered him. Numbers rarely behaved that neatly in the real world. He spent an extra hour reviewing archived reports, then 2 hours, then 3. The deeper he looked, the less comfortable he became. Nothing was obviously fraudulent. Nothing screamed corruption. Everything sat in a gray area that felt carefully constructed. Carefully enough to pass quick reviews. Not carefully enough to survive detailed examination. Ulric began making notes. Private notes. Nothing official. Not yet. He had learned long ago that accusations without evidence only created enemies. Evidence came first. Conclusions came later. The man whose name appeared most frequently throughout those reports was Brandon Mercer. Vice President of Operations, 45 years old, Harvard MBA, perfect suits, perfect smile, perfect reputation. Brandon was the type of executive magazines loved to photograph. Confident, charismatic, energetic. He could walk into a room of strangers and leave with allies. Employees admired him. Investors trusted him. Even members of the board seemed impressed by him. Many believed Brandon Mercer would eventually become CEO, perhaps even sooner than expected. Current CEO Daniel Brooks was approaching retirement. The company had quietly begun succession planning. Everyone knew it. Nobody discussed it openly. Brandon's name surfaced constantly in those conversations, at least according to rumors. Ulric paid little attention to rumors. He paid attention to records, and the records increasingly pointed toward Brandon's division. Not directly. Never directly. That was what made the situation strange. Every questionable transaction sat several layers beneath Brandon's approval authority. Every inconsistency could theoretically be explained. Every anomaly had plausible deniability, too much plausible deniability. That bothered Ulric more than the numbers themselves. One Tuesday morning he entered a conference room carrying audit summaries. A regional operations meeting was underway. Brandon stood near the front screen. He was speaking confidently about growth targets in the Midwest. People laughed at his jokes. Managers nodded when he spoke. Several executives were taking notes. Ulric waited quietly near the wall. When Brandon finished, he noticed him. For a brief second, nothing more. Just enough to acknowledge his existence. Then Brandon continued speaking to everyone else. Ulric had experienced that moment countless times. People often looked through him instead of at him. It never offended him. Visibility wasn't his objective. Accuracy was. After the meeting, one of the younger managers approached. "Ulric." "Morning." The manager lowered his voice. "You still reviewing freight reconciliation reports?" "Some of them." "Operations seems nervous lately." Ulric studied him. "Nervous about what?" The manager shrugged. "No idea, just a feeling." Then he walked away. A feeling, that was all, not evidence, not useful, yet it lingered in Ulric's thoughts. Because he had sensed it too. Subtle changes, conversations ending when he entered rooms, requests delayed, data access becoming slower, nothing significant individually. Together they formed a pattern, and patterns mattered. 2 weeks later, another unusual report arrived. This one concerned transportation expenses from 18 months earlier, an old file, one that should have been irrelevant. Ulric almost ignored it. Then he noticed a vendor name, the same vendor that appeared in one of the newer reports. That should not have happened. The contract had supposedly ended long ago. He opened archived records, then older records, then supporting documentation. Hours passed. The office slowly emptied around him. Outside his window, the Chicago skyline faded into evening shadows. Still he worked, line by line, invoice by invoice, timestamp by timestamp. Around 7:30 p.m. he found something. Not proof, not yet, but enough to make him sit back in his chair. The same approval sequence had appeared multiple times across different years. Different projects, different vendors, different amounts, identical approval patterns, identical routing, identical timing. Almost as if someone had copied a successful formula. The kind of formula nobody would notice unless they compared records separated by years. Ulric stared at the screen. His coffee had gone cold hours earlier. The office was nearly empty. Only cleaning crews remained. He opened another file, then another, then another. A knot slowly formed in his stomach, because the pattern wasn't getting weaker, it was getting stronger. For the first time, he began wondering whether this was larger than accounting irregularities, larger than operational mistakes, larger than one department. He printed several pages, placed them carefully into a folder, locked the folder inside his desk, then turned off his computer. As he walked towards the elevators, he passed a glass conference room overlooking the river. Inside stood Brandon Mercer, alone, speaking on his phone. His expression was different from the confident executive everyone knew. Tighter, more serious, almost tense. Ulric kept walking. He didn't stop, didn't stare, didn't speculate. Assumptions were dangerous. Facts mattered, only facts. Yet as the elevator doors closed, one thought remained. For 17 years, his instincts had protected him from mistakes. And those instincts were now telling him something important. The numbers weren't wrong by accident. Someone had made them wrong, and whoever that person was had become very skilled at hiding it. What Ulric didn't know yet was that the next piece of evidence would arrive from a young accountant's inbox, entirely by mistake, and once he saw it, there would be no turning back. The email arrived at 8:12 on a Wednesday morning. Ulric almost deleted it. The sender was Emily Carter, a staff accountant in the Midwest Operations Group, 28 years old, smart, organized, knew enough to still believe mistakes could be fixed with a simple apology. The subject line read, "Updated Reconciliation Worksheet." Nothing unusual. Ulric received dozens of spreadsheets every week. Most contained routine information. Most were forgotten within hours. This one should have been no different. He opened the attachment while finishing his coffee. Then he noticed a second file, not attached intentionally. The file name looked incomplete. Vendor Comparison Draft V3. That was strange. The file type wasn't part of the reconciliation package. It wasn't even addressed to compliance. Most likely Emily had attached it accidentally. Ulric clicked it. The spreadsheet opened. Rows of transportation vendors filled the screen. Contract values, payment schedules, approval dates. Nothing remarkable at first. Then he saw a highlighted section. Yellow cells. A private note. Probably intended only for internal accounting review, the note read, "Need clarification on duplicate freight adjustments. Totals do not match operational reports submitted by VP Operations." Ulric stopped reading. Not because the note was shocking, because it confirmed something he had been sensing for months. Someone else had noticed inconsistencies. He leaned closer to the screen. The spreadsheet contained two versions of the same payment summaries. One matched accounting records, the other matched operational reports. The numbers were different, not dramatically, just enough, always just enough. A few $1,000s here, a few thousand there. Across a company the size of Summit Harbor Logistics, such differences could disappear into the background. But repeated often enough, they became something else. They became a system. Ulric opened archived reports, then compared them against Emily's worksheet. The discrepancy appeared again, and again, and again. His pulse remained steady. Years of compliance work had trained him not to react emotionally. Excitement clouded judgment. Fear did the same. He focused only on facts. By lunchtime, he had identified 14 transactions carrying similar patterns. By 2 o'clock, he had found 23. By 4 o'clock, he had stopped counting. The problem wasn't isolated. It was spreading through multiple operational regions. Yet all roads seemed to lead back toward one department, operations, Brandon Mercer's division. Ulric printed several reports, then walked downstairs to accounting. Emily sat inside a cubicle near the west windows. She looked surprised when he approached. "Mr. Sanders?" "Morning, Emily. Did you get the reconciliation package?" "I did." A brief pause. "You attached an extra file." The color immediately drained from her face. "Oh, no." She spun toward her computer. "I wasn't supposed to send that." Ulric nodded calmly. "I figured. I'm sorry." "No need." She looked genuinely worried. Not guilty, not deceptive, just nervous. The reaction told him something important. Emily wasn't part of whatever was happening. She was stumbling near it. "Can I ask a question?" Ulric said. She hesitated, then nodded. "The discrepancies in that worksheet. Who asked you to review them?" Emily glanced around. The nearest employees were busy working. Still, she lowered her voice. "I wasn't assigned." "You weren't?" "No." "Then why review them?" She looked uncomfortable. "Because they didn't make sense." Ulric waited. People often revealed more when silence filled the space. After a moment, she continued. "I thought maybe accounting made a mistake. And we didn't." The answer hung between them. Simple, direct, dangerous. "Did you report it?" Emily swallowed. "My supervisor told me to leave it alone." Ulric's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who is your supervisor?" she answered. The name belonged to a manager inside Operations Finance, a manager who reported through Brandon Mercer's chain of command. Interesting. Very interesting. Ulric thanked her and left. He didn't ask further questions. Emily had already given him enough. Back upstairs, he closed his office door, something he rarely did. The evidence was still incomplete. But now he could see the shape of the problem, like a building emerging through fog. Not fully visible, visible enough. For the first time, he began creating a timeline. Every questionable transaction, every approval, every adjustment, every individual involved. The board covered his wall by late afternoon. Printouts, dates, vendor names, payment authorizations. Most connected to one another. Some did not. Yet, patterns continued forming. Then another discovery appeared. A deleted email. The message shouldn't have existed. It had been removed from active company servers months earlier, but backup archives retained fragments. Compliance access allowed Ulric to recover portions, not the entire conversation, just enough. The sender was a regional operations manager. The recipient was someone higher. The response section was missing, deleted. What remained was one sentence, a single line. "I don't think we should keep moving these adjustments between reporting periods." Ulric read it twice, then 3 times. Someone had objected. Someone inside the system had recognized what was happening. That meant this wasn't a misunderstanding. Mistakes didn't require concealment. Mistakes didn't require deleted messages. Mistakes didn't require shifting reporting periods. The knot in his stomach tightened. Outside his office, normal business continued. Phones rang. Meetings started and ended. Employees discussed weekend plans. The company moved millions of dollars every day. Nobody appeared aware that a hidden fault line might be running beneath the entire operation. The next week brought more changes, subtle ones, small enough that most people would ignore them. Ulric didn't. A recurring operations meeting disappeared from his calendar. No explanation. Another meeting was rescheduled. He wasn't invited. Then, access permissions changed. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to slow him down. 3 database folders suddenly required additional authorization. Reports that once took seconds to retrieve now required approval requests. Individually, each change seemed harmless. Together they formed another pattern. Someone was reducing his visibility, gradually, carefully, without creating an obvious record. Ulric knew exactly what that meant. Someone had noticed him, not fully, not yet, but enough. On Thursday afternoon, he crossed paths with Brandon Mercer near the executive elevators. Brandon smiled. The same polished executive smile everyone admired. "Ulric." "Brandon. Haven't seen you around lately." Ulric nodded. "Been busy." "Good." Brandon adjusted his cufflinks. "We all appreciate the work compliance does." The words sounded friendly. The timing did not. Ulric simply replied, "Glad to hear it." Brandon's smile lingered a second longer, then disappeared. He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Ulric stood still, observing, thinking. There had been something unusual in the exchange, not the words, the eyes. Brandon had looked at him differently, as if evaluating a threat. For years, Brandon barely acknowledged his existence. Now he was paying attention. That meant something had changed. Later that evening, Ulric remained in the office after most employees left. Rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights reflected across the dark water. His desk was covered with files, spreadsheets, contracts, audit logs, email records. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why the money involved was substantial, but not large enough for someone at Brandon Mercer's level to risk everything. There had to be another layer, another purpose, another motive. Ulric stared at a contract approval sequence. Then another. Then another. Suddenly, he noticed something. The same names appeared repeatedly. Not just Brandon's people, specific vendors, specific intermediaries, specific routing companies, a closed circle, a network. The realization sent a chill through him. Because networks protected themselves, and people protecting a network could become dangerous, very dangerous. For the first time since this began, Ulric considered the possibility that simply uncovering the truth might not be enough. Someone was already restricting his access. Someone was already watching. And if his suspicions were correct, the next move would not be financial. It would be personal. As he shut down his computer, his phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number, no greeting, no signature, just 6 words. "Stop digging while you still can." Ulric stared at the screen. The rain continued falling outside. The office remained silent. Then he slowly locked the phone, because the message confirmed exactly what he needed to know. The numbers were not wrong by accident, and whoever was responsible had finally realized he was getting close. Ulric Sanders did not answer the text message. He didn't block the number. He didn't report it. He didn't even save it. He simply stared at the screen for a few seconds before placing the phone face down on his kitchen table. The message itself wasn't important. People sent anonymous warnings every day. What mattered was timing. Someone had chosen to send it less than 24 hours after he discovered the deleted email. That meant one thing. Somebody was watching the investigation, not from a distance, from inside the company. The realization followed him through the rest of the evening, not as fear, as confirmation. For months, Ulric had been assembling pieces of a puzzle without knowing whether the final picture would justify the effort. Now he knew. Nobody threatened people over accounting mistakes. Nobody hid audit trails over clerical errors. Nobody manipulated reporting periods because of harmless oversights. There was something real underneath the numbers, something valuable enough to protect. The next morning, Ulric arrived at Summit Harbor Logistics before sunrise. Chicago was still wrapped in darkness. The lobby lights reflected across polished marble floors. Security guards exchanged familiar greetings as he crossed the entrance. Nothing looked different, but everything felt different. For the first time, he was no longer investigating a possibility. He was investigating an active threat. At 6:52 a.m., he entered his office, closed the door, turned on his computer, then began building what would eventually become known as the Harbor File. The name wasn't dramatic. Ulric wasn't the type to create dramatic names. He simply needed a way to organize evidence. The company was called Summit Harbor Logistics. The investigation involved the company's operations. Harbor File seemed practical. That was enough. He created multiple folders: contracts, vendor records, audit logs, email archives, financial adjustments, personnel links. Every document received its own reference number. Every timeline entry received a timestamp. Every conclusion required supporting evidence. No assumptions, no theories, facts only. By lunchtime, the file already contained over 300 pages of material. By the end of the week, it contained more than 700. The deeper Ulric dug, the more disturbing the patterns became. Prairie Crest Foods, Midwest Freight Partners, Silverline Distribution, 3 different vendors, 3 different regions, 3 different project managers. Yet somehow identical adjustment methods appeared throughout all of them. The same reporting shifts, the same approval pathways, the same accounting discrepancies, always small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits, always large enough to accumulate substantial money over time. That level of consistency didn't happen accidentally. It required coordination. It required planning. It required leadership. The question was how high that leadership reached. Late Tuesday afternoon, Ulric found himself staring at a name he hadn't thought about in years. Victoria Hale, former general counsel, now retired. Technically. In reality, Victoria never fully retired from anything. She had spent nearly 3 decades protecting Summit Harbor from lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and executive mistakes. Before leaving the company, she had personally hired Ulric into compliance. She trusted facts. She trusted patience, and she trusted very few people. Ulric still remembered something she had told him during his first year. The truth is rarely hidden by complexity. What hides it? He had asked. She had smiled. Noise. The memory stayed with him. By 6 o'clock that evening, he made a decision. He opened an encrypted email account, drafted a message, then deleted it, started over, deleted it again. Finally, he wrote 3 sentences. No accusations, no conclusions, just facts. Evidence had been discovered. Patterns suggested intentional manipulation. Independent review was needed. He attached nothing, sent nothing, not yet. Instead, he printed a summary and placed it inside a plain manila folder. The next day, he drove to a quiet office building in downtown Chicago. Victoria Hale maintained a consulting practice there. The receptionist escorted him into a conference room. Victoria entered 5 minutes later, 60 years old, sharp eyes, silver hair, the same calm presence he remembered. She sat down, looked at the folder, then looked at him. You don't visit people without a reason, Ulric. No. How serious is it? Ulric slid the folder across the table. Serious enough that I haven't reported it internally. That caught her attention. She opened the folder, read silently. The room remained quiet. Page after page, note after note, cross-references, approval chains, metadata records. She spent nearly 30 minutes reviewing everything. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. Not shocked, concerned. How much of this has been verified? Everything in the file, independently. Yes? Victoria nodded slowly, then turned back to several pages, particularly those involving Operations Division approvals, particularly those connected to Brandon Mercer. Still, she asked no leading questions. That was one reason Ulric respected her. Good investigators avoided assumptions. After several minutes, she closed the folder. What do you want from me? Ulric answered honestly. Perspective. Victoria leaned back. For a moment she studied the ceiling, thinking, calculating, evaluating risk. Finally she spoke. The board has received concerns before. Ulric remained silent. She continued. Nothing as organized as this. That statement landed heavily, because it meant he wasn't the first person to notice problems. Others had seen warning signs, perhaps years earlier, perhaps recently, yet nothing had reached this stage. Victoria tapped a finger against the folder. You understand what happens if this goes where I think it's going? Yes. No, you don't. The response was immediate, direct, certain. If senior leadership becomes involved, careers end. She paused. Not only theirs. Ulric understood. Investigations created collateral damage. Entire departments could collapse. Vendor relationships could disappear. Stock prices could react. Thousands of employees might feel the consequences. That was exactly why evidence mattered. Facts had to be airtight. Victoria looked through several pages once more. Then she asked a question that surprised him. Has Brandon noticed you? Ulric considered the answer. I think so. Her expression hardened. That wasn't encouraging. Then you need to be careful. I always am. I'm serious. The room fell silent. Victoria rarely repeated herself. When she did, it mattered. She leaned forward. For the first time since the meeting began, genuine concern appeared in her voice. People assume investigations fail because evidence disappears. Ulric listened. They're wrong. She tapped the harbor file. Investigations fail because investigators disappear. The words lingered between them. Not a threat, a warning, a realistic one. Victoria had spent decades inside executive boardrooms. She understood power better than most. Ulric left the meeting shortly after. The harbor file remained in his possession. Nothing official had been launched, no accusations filed, no board review initiated. Yet something important had changed. For the first time, another trusted professional had reviewed the evidence, and she had not dismissed it. As he walked through downtown Chicago toward his car, cold wind swept between the buildings. People hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Traffic moved through intersections. Life continued normally, but Ulric could feel pressure building beneath the surface. The investigation was no longer his alone. Others now knew. Others were watching, which meant the people on the other side might also become aware. That realization followed him into the weekend, and by Monday morning his concerns would prove justified. Because somewhere inside Summit Harbor Logistics, someone was already preparing a response, and that response would not target the evidence. It would target Ulric Sanders himself. A few days later, Victoria Hale called him unexpectedly. Her voice remained calm, measured, professional, but the message was unmistakable. If Brandon Mercer realizes what you're holding, she said quietly, you won't make it to Monday. Victoria Hale's warning stayed with Ulric throughout the week, not because it frightened him, because it made sense. People rarely attacked facts directly. Facts were stubborn. Documents existed, records existed, metadata existed. Destroying every trace of evidence inside a billion-dollar corporation was nearly impossible. Destroying the credibility of the person presenting that evidence, much easier. That thought occupied his mind as he stepped out of the elevator on Monday morning. The 21st floor looked exactly as it always had. Rows of glass offices, conference rooms overlooking the Chicago River, employees carrying coffee cups while checking emails, the normal rhythm of corporate life. Yet something felt different, subtle, hard to define. Conversations seemed shorter when he approached. Several employees avoided eye contact. One manager who normally greeted him every morning simply nodded and walked away. Ulric noticed. He noticed everything, but he said nothing. At 8:17 a.m., an automated email appeared in his inbox. Mandatory security review. Attendance required. Conference room B. 10:00 a.m. The sender was corporate security, specifically Thomas Reed, Director of Security. Ulric stared at the message. The wording felt unusual. Security reviews happened, but rarely without explanation, especially not involving compliance personnel. He checked the attendee list. Human resources, information technology, security, no compliance representatives, no department leadership. Interesting, very interesting. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Ulric entered conference room B. Thomas Reed sat at the far end of the table, a broad-shouldered former federal investigator with 20 years of experience. Beside him sat 2 HR managers. Several folders rested on the table. No one smiled. Thomas gestured toward a chair. "Morning, Ulric." "Morning." Ulric sat down. The door closed behind him. Thomas folded his hands. "We need to discuss a potential security matter." Ulric remained calm. "What kind of matter?" Thomas exchanged a glance with HR, then opened one of the folders. Inside was a photograph, a USB drive, black, generic, unremarkable, the kind sold in any electronics store. Thomas slid the photograph across the table. "Have you seen this before?" Ulric looked at it. "No." Thomas nodded. The response appeared expected. "Earlier this morning, this device was discovered inside your desk." Silence. Not surprise, just silence. Because the moment Thomas finished speaking, everything became clear. Victoria had been right. The response had begun. Ulric studied the photograph again, then looked at Thomas. "When was it found?" "Approximately 7:40 a.m. "Who found it?" Thomas paused briefly. "A facilities employee." "Name?" Another pause. "That information isn't relevant right now." It was relevant, which was exactly why Thomas avoided answering. Ulric noticed. Again, he noticed everything. The meeting continued. Thomas opened another folder. "This device appears to contain customer shipping data." "Does it?" "We believe so." "Have you verified that?" Thomas hesitated. "It is currently reviewing the contents." Interesting. Very interesting. The accusation existed before verification. That told Ulric plenty. One HR manager cleared her throat. "Mr. Sanders, have you ever removed company information from Summit Harbor Systems?" "No." "Have you transferred customer records to personal devices?" "No." "Have you shared protected information externally?" "No." The answers came easily because they were true. Still, the room felt oddly rehearsed. Questions arrived too quickly, almost as though conclusions had already been reached. Ulric answered everything calmly. No defensiveness, no anger, no raised voice. People often interpreted calmness as weakness. That misconception had benefited him for years. The interview lasted 40 minutes. By the end, Thomas closed the folder. "We may need additional review." "Of course." Ulric stood, then paused. One question remained, a simple one, the kind he always asked. "When can I see the access logs?" The room grew quiet. Thomas frowned. "Access logs. Who entered my office?" The silence deepened. Ulric continued. "My office has hallway camera coverage." Nobody answered. He wasn't finished. "My floor requires badge access." Still silence. "Who accessed the area before the device was discovered?" The HR manager shifted uncomfortably. Thomas finally spoke. "We'll review all available information." That wasn't an answer. Which made it an answer. Ulric nodded, then left. The moment he stepped into the hallway, he knew exactly what was happening. Someone wanted urgency. Urgency discouraged investigation. Urgency encouraged assumptions, and assumptions could destroy careers. Back inside his office, he sat quietly for several minutes, thinking, evaluating, reviewing possibilities. Then he opened a notebook, not a company notebook, a personal one. He began recording events, times, names, statements, questions asked, questions avoided. Every detail mattered. At noon, another unusual development occurred. His access permissions changed again. Several databases became unavailable. Files disappeared from his dashboard. Archived vendor records could no longer be opened. The restrictions were temporary according to IT. Security review procedures. Nothing personal. Of course, nothing personal. By mid-afternoon, rumors had begun spreading. Corporate offices generated rumors faster than they generated reports. Whispers moved through departments, questions followed, people speculated. Nobody approached him directly, yet he could feel it. The shift, the distance, the uncertainty. Employees who once treated him normally now watched him carefully, not because they knew anything, because they sensed something. Around 3 o'clock, Emily Carter appeared at his doorway, nervous, concerned. "Do you have a minute?" Ulric nodded. She stepped inside, closed the door, then lowered her voice. "Something strange happened." "What?" "My supervisor requested copies of reconciliation records." "Which records?" "The Prairie Crest files." Ulric's expression remained neutral. Inside, however, another piece clicked into place. "When?" "This morning." "Why?" Emily shook her head. He wouldn't say. That mattered, because those files were central to the harbor file, and someone was suddenly interested in them. Emily hesitated, then asked the question, clearly weighing on her mind. "Are you in trouble?" Ulric considered the question, then answered honestly. "I don't know." It wasn't fear speaking. It was precision. He truly didn't know. Not yet. Emily left shortly afterward. The office grew quieter as afternoon turned toward evening. Employees began heading home. Conference rooms emptied. Lights switched off one by one. Ulric remained at his desk, reviewing notes, reviewing timelines, reviewing people. Eventually, he noticed something. One name appeared repeatedly. Not in financial records, not in contracts, in access permissions, approval requests, administrative changes. The same operations executive appeared behind multiple decisions affecting his investigation. One of Brandon Mercer's most trusted directors, a loyal lieutenant. The connection wasn't enough to prove anything, but it strengthened the pattern, and patterns mattered. At 5:46 p.m., his phone rang. Victoria Hale. Ulric answered. "Victoria." Her voice sounded calm, almost too calm. "Listen carefully." He sat upright. "I'm listening." "A source contacted me." Silence. Then, "They've accelerated." Ulric stared through the window toward the Chicago skyline. The sun was disappearing behind distant buildings. "What does that mean?" "It means somebody wants this finished quickly." Neither needed clarification. They both understood what finished meant. Victoria continued. "If they're moving this aggressively, they know you're close." Ulric remained silent. The statement matched his own conclusions. Then Victoria said something that made his stomach tighten. "Whatever happens next, do not react emotionally. I won't." "I know." A brief pause followed. Then her voice lowered. "They're setting a trap, Ulric." The line remained quiet. Traffic moved far below the building. The city continued normally. Yet somewhere inside Summit Harbor, logistics plans were already unfolding. Plans designed not to disprove his evidence. Plans designed to destroy the man carrying it. And before the week ended, those plans would become very public. Friday arrived cold and gray. Low clouds hung over Chicago. Rain drifted across the river in thin sheets. Inside Summit Harbor logistics. However, the weather wasn't what people were talking about. Something else was moving through the building, something harder to define. Tension. The kind that spread without explanation. The kind employees sensed before they understood. Ulric noticed it the moment he entered the lobby at 6:47 a.m. People looked away slightly too quickly. Conversations paused when he approached. Several managers who normally greeted him simply nodded and continued walking. No one said anything directly. No one needed to. The rumor had already done its work. By 9 o'clock, he had received 3 calendar cancellations. By 10 o'clock, his remaining system access had been restricted again. By 11:30, even his direct reports were avoiding unnecessary conversations. The isolation was becoming systematic, deliberate, and public. Ulric sat quietly in his office reviewing documents. Not company documents, copies. Records already secured, material already preserved. The harbor file now existed in multiple locations. Physical copies, encrypted backups, independent records. He had learned long ago that evidence protected nobody if it existed in only one place. Around noon, his phone vibrated. A calendar invitation appeared. Mandatory Executive Review. 4 Euro PM. Conference Room 2201. Attendance required. No agenda, no explanation, no list of participants, just a meeting. Ulric stared at the screen for several seconds, then accepted the invitation. Exactly as expected. The trap Victoria predicted was finally reaching its conclusion. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Employees moved through hallways carrying laptops and coffee cups. Meetings came and went. The building maintained its usual rhythm, yet beneath the surface something was waiting. At 3:52 p.m., Ulric stood from his desk. He straightened his tie, closed a folder, turned off his monitor, then walked toward the elevators. His footsteps echoed softly across the hallway. Several employees noticed him passing. Some watched openly. Others pretended not to. The executive conference suite occupied the 22nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked downtown Chicago. The room itself was designed to impress investors and clients. Long walnut table, leather chairs, screens covering an entire wall. A view worth millions. As Ulric entered, he immediately understood the purpose of the setting. This wasn't an investigation. It was a performance. Brandon Mercer sat near the center of the table. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect confidence. Thomas Reed sat nearby. 2 human resources executives occupied seats on the opposite side. Several senior managers had also been invited, witnesses, an audience. Ulric took a seat. No one offered small talk. No one welcomed him. The atmosphere felt rehearsed. At exactly 4 o'clock, Brandon spoke first. "Thank you for coming." His voice carried the calm confidence that had helped build his reputation. He looked around the room, then settled his gaze on Ulric. "We need to address a serious matter involving company security." Silence followed. Brandon continued. "Evidence has emerged, suggesting unauthorized possession of protected customer information." He paused, allowing the words to settle, allowing people to draw conclusions, allowing suspicion to grow. Ulric remained motionless. Brandon opened a folder. Inside were photographs, printouts, security reports. The same materials Thomas Reed had referenced earlier in the week. "We take these matters seriously." Another pause. "This company is built on trust." Several managers nodded. Ulric noticed. The performance was working. Brandon wasn't presenting facts. He was shaping emotion, a subtle difference, an important one. Thomas Reed then outlined the discovery of the USB device, the timeline, the investigation, the review process. Everything sounded official, professional, reasonable, yet critical details remained missing. No mention of camera footage, no mention of access logs, no mention of chain of custody verification. Ulric noticed every omission. Brandon finally turned toward him. "Ulric, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Every eye in the room shifted, waiting, watching. The moment had clearly been anticipated. Many expected outrage, defensiveness, panic. Instead, Ulric simply asked a question. "Has the hallway camera footage been reviewed?" Silence. The shift in the room was immediate, not dramatic, subtle, but real. Brandon's expression changed for a fraction of a second, then recovered. Thomas answered, "The review is ongoing." Ulric nodded. "What about badge access records?" Another brief silence. Again, Thomas answered, "We're still gathering information." Interesting. Very interesting. Because by now several managers were beginning to notice what wasn't being said. Facts were missing. Key facts. Brandon leaned forward. "We're discussing a serious security breach." Ulric met his gaze calmly. "I'm discussing evidence." The room fell silent. No raised voices, no accusations, just 2 sentences. Yet the contrast was impossible to miss. Brandon redirected the conversation. Questions continued, more accusations disguised as inquiries, more assumptions presented as concerns. The meeting stretched past 4:30, then 4:40. Eventually, Human Resources delivered the conclusion everyone already knew. Pending further investigation, administrative separation, immediate removal of company access, standard procedure. The words sounded procedural, neutral, yet the objective was obvious. Humiliation. Public humiliation. The kind designed to destroy credibility before facts could intervene. One HR executive slid paperwork across the table. Ulric reviewed it briefly, then signed. No protest, no argument, no speech. That surprised several people. They expected resistance. Instead, they found composure. Brandon appeared almost disappointed. The meeting ended at 4:37 p.m., the exact time people would later remember. Not because of what was said, because of what happened next. A security officer entered the room, then another. Neither appeared hostile, neither seemed comfortable. One cleared his throat. "Mr. Sanders." Ulric stood. The officer extended a hand. "Your badge, please." Ulric removed it calmly, placed it into the officer's palm. Then came the company phone, the laptop, the access card. One item at a time, no drama, no resistance, no scene. The room watched. Managers avoided eye contact. A few looked embarrassed. Others looked relieved that it wasn't happening to them. Corporate survival often produced strange reactions. The walk from the conference room to the elevator felt longer than usual. Employees looked up from desks as he passed. Whispers followed. Phones paused mid-conversation. People watched. The quiet man from compliance, the man who had spent 17 years protecting company records, being escorted out. Some assumed guilt. Others assumed politics. Most assumed they would never know the truth. The elevator descended slowly. 22, 21, 20, 19. Ulric stood between the 2 officers, calm, silent, observing. The lobby came into view moments later. Large windows reflected the gray afternoon sky. Rain continued falling outside. Employees entering the building stepped aside as security escorted him toward the exit. Then something caught his attention. Above the lobby, behind a glass wall overlooking the entrance, a figure stood watching. Brandon Mercer, hands in his pockets, expression relaxed, satisfied. From a distance, nobody else would have noticed. Ulric did, not because he was looking for it, because he always paid attention. The image lasted only a second before Brandon stepped away from the glass. Gone. The moment passed, but the message remained clear. This had never been about security. It had always been about removal. The revolving doors opened. Cold air struck Ulric's face. Rain drifted across the sidewalk. The city noise felt strangely distant. One of the security officers handed him a small box containing personal belongings from his desk. The officer looked uncomfortable. "Sorry, sir," Ulric nodded. "It's not your fault." Then he turned, walked toward the parking garage. No anger, no panic, no desperate phone calls, because something nobody inside that building understood was already in motion. Hours earlier, before entering conference room 2201, Ulric Sanders had scheduled a single email. An email that would leave his outbox automatically at precisely 5:00 p.m. An email addressed to people far more powerful than Brandon Mercer. And by the time that message reached their inboxes, the game inside Summit Harbor Logistics would begin changing in ways almost nobody could imagine. The rain followed Ulric Sanders all the way to the parking garage. Water dripped from concrete beams overhead. Tires hissed across wet pavement. The sounds echoed through the structure as he walked toward level 3. Spot 314. The same place he parked every workday. For 17 years. Nothing about the garage had changed. Everything about his life had. At least that was what most people inside Summit Harbor Logistics would have assumed. They would have imagined panic, anger, embarrassment, maybe even desperation. After all, a 42-year-old compliance analyst had just been escorted from a billion-dollar corporation in front of dozens of colleagues. Most people would have viewed that moment as an ending. Ulric did not. He opened the driver's door of his Honda Accord, placed the cardboard box from security onto the passenger seat, then sat quietly for several seconds. Not thinking about Brandon Mercer, not thinking about humiliation, not even thinking about the investigation. He was thinking about timing. Timing mattered, always, especially now. At exactly 500 p.m., his scheduled email would be delivered. Not to management, not to human resources, not to corporate security, to the board of directors, specifically Rachel Whitmore, Michael Grayson, Victoria Hale, and 2 external legal advisors retained by the board months earlier. 5 inboxes, 5 copies, 5 independent recipients. The message contained a compressed archive, encrypted, password protected. Inside sat the harbor file, every contract, every audit trail, every suspicious adjustment, every preserved email, every timeline, every piece of evidence collected over 7 months. If anyone attempted to destroy one copy, 4 others remained. If anyone attempted to discredit him, the records would still exist. Facts did not depend on reputation. That principle had guided most of his career. Now it would be tested. His phone vibrated. 5:00 p.m. The email had been sent. Ulric looked at the screen. No celebration, no satisfaction. Only confirmation. Step completed, nothing more. He started the engine, then drove into downtown traffic. Rain streaked across the windshield. Chicago's skyline blurred through the gray afternoon. Thousands of people rushed toward the weekend. Restaurants filled, train stations crowded, office workers escaped their buildings. Meanwhile, inside Summit Harbor Logistics, most employees believed the situation had already been resolved. The problem employee had been removed. The crisis was over. The company could move on. That assumption would not survive the weekend. Around 6 o'clock, Ulric arrived at a Chase Bank branch near North Michigan Avenue. The building closed in less than an hour. He entered carrying only his worn leather briefcase. The same briefcase most executives considered outdated. The same briefcase many employees had quietly mocked. Nobody knew it contained something far more valuable than appearances. The vault manager recognized him immediately. "Mr. Sanders." "Good evening." "Safety deposit box." "Please." Within minutes he was escorted into a private room. The steel door closed behind him. Rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls, quiet, secure, predictable. Ulric preferred places like this. No politics, no rumors, no performance, only procedures. He unlocked box number 427, then carefully removed its contents. 3 thick binders, 2 encrypted hard drives, a sealed envelope. Nothing dramatic. Yet together they represented years of work. Insurance. The first hard drive contained duplicate copies of the harbor file. The second contained backup records. The binders held printed evidence. The sealed envelope contained something else, a signed letter. Victoria Hale's signature appeared at the bottom, dated 3 weeks earlier. The letter verified that she had reviewed portions of Ulric's findings and recommended further independent examination. Simple, professional, powerful, because it established chronology. It proved the investigation existed long before the accusations against him appeared. That mattered, very much. Ulric spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing everything, not because he doubted the records, because precision mattered. One missing document could create questions. One incomplete timeline could create doubt. By the time he returned everything to the box, he felt confident. The evidence was safe. Safer than it had ever been inside Summit Harbor. As he locked the box, his phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't an email notification. It was a call, Victoria Hale. He answered immediately. "Victoria." No greeting, no small talk. Her voice carried unusual urgency. "Rachel received the file." Rachel Whitmore, chairwoman of the board, one of the most influential people inside the company. Ulric listened carefully. What was her reaction? A brief pause followed. Then, "She called within 7 minutes. That got his attention. Rachel Whitmore wasn't known for impulsive decisions. She reviewed information carefully, methodically. If she called immediately, something in the file had disturbed her. Victoria continued. Michael Grayson reviewed the audit trail. Another board member, former senior partner at one of the largest accounting firms in the country, a man who had spent decades investigating corporate misconduct. And he wants an emergency review. Ulric remained silent. Outside the private room, the bank was preparing to close. Employees moved through hallways. Security procedures began. Yet for a moment none of it mattered, because something important had just happened. The harbor file had crossed a threshold. It was no longer an internal concern. It was now a board-level concern, a completely different battlefield. Victoria's voice softened slightly. You did the right thing. Ulric appreciated the statement, not because he needed validation, because he knew how carefully Victoria chose her words. Then she added something else, something unexpected. Don't answer company calls this weekend. His eyes narrowed. Why? They may try to create a narrative. That made sense, very good sense. A public accusation often moved faster than an investigation. People rushed to fill informational gaps. Rumors multiplied, stories evolved. By Monday morning, assumptions could harden into perceived truth. Ulric understood the strategy. He had watched it happen before, just never to himself. After ending the call, he left the bank. Night had fallen over Chicago. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement. Traffic crawled through intersections. The city felt enormous, indifferent. A reminder that individual crises rarely mattered outside their immediate circles. He stopped at Harbor Deli, the same place where he bought breakfast every morning. The owner looked surprised. You're here late, Ulric smiled slightly. It looks that way. The owner handed him a coffee. No questions, no curiosity, just routine. Sometimes routine felt valuable, especially when uncertainty surrounded everything else. Later that evening, Ulric sat inside his apartment overlooking the river. Television off, phone silent, laptop closed. For the first time in months, there was nothing left to collect, nothing left to organize, nothing left to preserve. The evidence existed, the file existed, the board had received it. Now others would have to act. Around 9:30 p.m., another email arrived. Not from the company, not from Victoria. From Rachel Whitmore herself, brief, direct, only 3 sentences. Mr. Sanders, thank you for providing the materials. Please make yourself available Sunday evening. More information will follow. Ulric read it twice, then closed the message. Rachel Whitmore did not send unnecessary emails. If she was personally contacting him, events were moving faster than expected, much faster. Across town, inside luxury apartments and executive homes, several people were probably enjoying the beginning of their weekend. Some believed they had won. Some believed the threat had been eliminated. Some believed Ulric Sanders had disappeared from the board entirely. What they didn't know was that the harbor file was already moving through the highest levels of Summit Harbor logistics. What they didn't know was that board members were reading documents at that very moment. And what they definitely didn't know was that before the weekend ended, a private meeting would take place inside Chicago's historic Palmer House Hotel. A meeting capable of changing the future leadership of the entire operations division. Saturday morning arrived quietly. For the first time in years, Ulric Sanders woke without an office to visit. No compliance reports waited in his inbox. No vendor audits sat on his desk. No meetings appeared on his calendar. Yet he found himself awake before sunrise anyway. Old habits survived difficult circumstances. He brewed coffee, opened the curtains overlooking the Chicago River, and watched the city slowly come to life. Normally, weekend helped him clear his mind. This one did not. Too many pieces were moving. Too many decisions were being made behind closed doors. Somewhere inside Summit Harbor, logistics executives were likely discussing the incident from Friday. Some would support Brandon Mercer. Some would question him. Most would simply protect themselves. Corporate crises followed predictable patterns. People rarely rushed toward uncertainty. They rushed away from it. Ulric understood that. What he didn't know yet was how much of the situation the board of directors already understood. At 8:14 a.m., his phone rang. Victoria Hale, again. Ulric answered immediately. Good morning. It won't be a good morning for everyone. That was her greeting, straight to the point, as usual. Ulric stepped onto the balcony. Cold air rolled in from the river. What happened? Victoria paused, then answered carefully. Rachel spent most of last night reviewing the harbor file. Rachel Whitmore, chairwoman of the board, known throughout the company for being methodical and extremely difficult to impress. If she devoted an entire evening to reviewing evidence personally, the matter had already become serious. Victoria continued. Michael Grayson reviewed the audit logs. Another board member, former forensic accounting specialist, a man who had spent decades identifying financial manipulation. And he reached the same conclusion you did. Ulric said nothing. Victoria knew he understood. The significance didn't require explanation. Independent review, independent confirmation. Two of the most experienced people on the board had examined the evidence and reached similar conclusions. That mattered. A lot. There's more, Victoria said. Ulric waited. The board investigation didn't start with your file. That caught his attention, not visibly, but internally. A new piece of the puzzle had appeared. What do you mean? The board has been monitoring Brandon Mercer for months. Silence. The city traffic below seemed suddenly distant. Victoria continued. 7 months. Ulric remained quiet, processing. 7 months. That changed everything. Until now, he had assumed the harbor file triggered the board's interest. The reality was more complicated. The board already had concerns. His evidence simply expanded them. What were they looking at, he asked. Executive conduct. Anything specific? Victoria hesitated. Nothing proven. That answer told him enough. Boards rarely investigated senior executives without reason. The threshold was high, extremely high, yet apparently Brandon had crossed it long ago. Victoria's voice lowered slightly. The problem was evidence. Ulric understood immediately. Suspicions existed. Proof did not, until now. Until the harbor file, until Friday. Suddenly the pieces fit together, the hidden concerns, the unusual responses, the urgency from Rachel Whitmore. The board wasn't reacting to a single compliance issue. They were responding to something larger, something potentially threatening the future leadership of the company. Because Daniel Brooks was retiring, and Brandon Mercer was widely viewed as a future executive leader, perhaps even the future CEO. The implications were enormous. After ending the call, Ulric spent most of Saturday reviewing his own records, not because anyone asked him to, because precision mattered. If questions came, answers needed to exist. He reviewed timelines, emails, audit summaries, vendor records, again and again. Nothing changed. The facts remained the facts. By late afternoon, another message arrived, this time from Rachel Whitmore herself. A formal meeting request. Sunday evening, Palmer House Hotel, private conference suite, attendance required. No additional explanation, none was needed. The board was moving, fast, very fast. Meanwhile, across the city, Brandon Mercer spent his weekend under very different assumptions. Ulric couldn't know Brandon's thoughts, but he could observe the consequences of his confidence. Several company contacts quietly reached out to former colleagues. Rumors circulated. The story spreading through Summit Harbor seemed remarkably consistent. Compliance violation, unauthorized data possession, administrative removal, case closed. Someone had clearly helped shape the narrative. The speed of it was impressive, almost professional, which made Ulric even more suspicious. People don't move that quickly unless they believe victory is already secured. By Sunday morning, another important development emerged. Victoria called again, the third time in 2 days, unusual even for her. Something happened. Ulric sat up straighter. What? The board requested independent access logs. That got his attention immediately, because access logs had been one of the first questions he asked during the investigation, and one of the questions nobody seemed eager to answer. What did they find? Victoria paused, not for dramatic effect, for precision. They found missing review requests. Ulric frowned. Missing. Someone requested footage, a beat, then canceled the request. Interesting, very interesting, because ordinary security investigations didn't avoid evidence, they sought it. The cancellation itself wasn't proof, but it was another pattern, another piece, another coincidence, and coincidences were becoming increasingly rare. The rest of Sunday passed slowly. Chicago remained wrapped in gray skies. Rain drifted through downtown streets. People filled restaurants and museums. Tourists wandered beneath umbrellas. The city moved normally. Yet inside Summit Harbor Logistics, a storm was forming. Most employees didn't know it. Most executives didn't know it. Some board members were only beginning to understand it. But events had already moved beyond routine corporate politics. At 5:40 p.m., Ulric arrived at the Palmer House Hotel. The historic building stood glowing against the rainy evening. Elegant, timeless. The kind of place where important decisions had been made for generations. He entered through the main lobby. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors. Guests moved quietly through the hotel. No one paid attention to him. Just another man in a gray suit. Just another guest. That anonymity suited him. A hotel employee escorted him to a private conference suite on an upper floor. The hallway remained silent. Carpet muted every footstep. The door stood partially open. Light spilled into the corridor. Voices drifted from inside. Ulric paused briefly. Not from nervousness, from awareness. He understood the importance of this moment. 7 months of investigation, years of corporate relationships, potentially billions of dollars in operational oversight, all converging into one room, one evening, one decision. He stepped inside. Rachel Whitmore stood near the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Michael Grayson sat at the conference table surrounded by documents. Victoria Hale occupied a seat nearby. Several thick binders lay open. Audit records, printouts, timelines, evidence, the harbor file. Rachel turned toward him. Her expression remained calm, controlled, yet something had changed. The skepticism common among board members was gone. In its place sat certainty, not complete certainty, but enough to move forward, enough to act, enough to understand that Friday's events might not have been the victory Brandon Mercer believed they were. Rachel gestured toward an empty chair. Mr. Sanders. Ulric sat down. Nobody discussed small talk. Nobody wasted time. The atmosphere inside the room felt different from every meeting he had attended at Summit Harbor. Focused, serious, purposeful. Because everyone present understood one thing. The investigation had entered a new phase, and somewhere across Chicago, Brandon Mercer was likely preparing for Monday morning under the assumption that his greatest obstacle had already been removed. What he didn't know was that the people sitting in this room were no longer asking whether a problem existed. They were asking how large it was, and before the evening ended, they would discover evidence capable of changing the future of Summit Harbor Logistics forever. The conference suite inside the Palmer House Hotel felt very different from the executive boardrooms at Summit Harbor Logistics. There were no glass walls, no expensive displays, no carefully staged corporate atmosphere, just a long wooden table, stacks of documents, coffee cups, and people focused entirely on facts. Ulric Sanders preferred rooms like this. Facts usually survived longer there. Rachel Whitmore sat at the head of the table. As chairwoman of the board, she possessed the kind of authority that rarely needed to be displayed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dominate conversations. People listened because they understood the consequences of not listening. Michael Grayson sat beside her. Several binders lay open in front of him. Color-coded tabs divided hundreds of pages. Audit reports, financial summaries, contract approvals, security records. Victoria Hale occupied the opposite side of the table. A legal pad rested beside her coffee. Notes filled multiple pages. The room carried the feeling of people who had already spent hours examining evidence. And they had. Rachel looked toward Ulric. "Thank you for coming." Ulric nodded. "Of course." Rachel folded her hands. "We reviewed the harbor file." No emotion, no exaggeration, just a statement. Yet its significance was enormous. The harbor file had officially crossed from investigation into action. Michael leaned forward. "I spent most of Saturday reviewing your audit trails." Ulric listened carefully. Michael was not a man who offered compliments lightly. "If these records are accurate," Michael continued, "the operational discrepancies are real." Victoria immediately added, "They are accurate." The certainty in her voice mattered. Rachel looked toward Ulric again. "Walk us through the timeline." For the next 40 minutes, Ulric did exactly that. Not dramatically, not emotionally, methodically. He explained how the first discrepancies appeared. The repeated adjustment patterns. The manipulated reporting periods, the vendor relationships, the deleted email, the warning text, the sudden restrictions on system access, the planted USB device, the administrative removal, piece by piece, fact by fact. No assumptions, no theories. When he finished, nobody spoke for several seconds. Not because they doubted him, because they were processing the scale of what they had just heard. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "The timing bothers me," Ulric nodded. "It bothered me, too." Rachel looked between them. "Which timing?" Michael opened one of the binders. Several printed reports lay highlighted in yellow. "The administrative action," he tapped the page. "Everything accelerates after Ulric begins asking questions." Rachel studied the documents. The pattern became obvious once someone pointed it out. For months, irregularities existed. Then scrutiny increased. Then access restrictions appeared. Then accusations appeared. Then termination procedures appeared. Too many events, too close together, too convenient. Coincidences existed, but not this many, not in one sequence. Michael opened another folder. "This concerns me more." He slid several pages across the table. Security records, access logs, badge activity. Ulric immediately recognized them, the same records Thomas Reed had avoided discussing. Rachel studied the pages, then frowned. "What am I looking at?" Michael answered. "A missing request." Rachel looked up. Michael continued. "Someone requested hallway footage." A pause. Then canceled the review. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "When?" Michael pointed to a timestamp. 23 minutes after the request." Silence. Not dramatic silence, professional silence, the kind that appears when experienced people discover something they cannot easily explain. Rachel looked at Ulric. "Did anyone mention this during your security review?" "No." Another pause. Michael flipped to the next page, then another, then another. The pattern continued. Incomplete reviews, interrupted procedures, missing documentation, nothing individually catastrophic, together different story, very different. Rachel leaned back. For the first time all evening, frustration appeared. Controlled frustration. The dangerous kind. Someone was avoiding evidence. Nobody argued. Nobody disagreed. Because the record spoke clearly. Michael then reached for another binder. Thicker, heavier. One containing information that hadn't come from the harbor file. Board investigation records, 7 months of quiet observations, 7 months of concerns, 7 months of unanswered questions. He opened it carefully. "What you're seeing today didn't begin with Ulric." Rachel nodded. That much had already been established. Michael continued. "We started receiving reports last fall. Vendor complaints, internal concerns, unusual expense growth, executive behavior issues, nothing independently actionable, enough collectively to justify monitoring." Ulric listened. Each new detail expanded his understanding of the situation. The board hadn't been inactive, they simply lacked proof. Until now. Michael pointed to several pages. Every path eventually led back to operations. Another page. "Specifically Brandon Mercer's chain of authority," Victoria added quietly. That still wasn't enough. She was right. Suspicion wasn't evidence, no matter how strong the suspicion. Rachel turned toward the window. Downtown Chicago glowed beneath the rainy night. Traffic lights reflected across wet streets. For a moment she said nothing. Then, "Brandon believes he won." No one disputed it. From Brandon's perspective, events likely appeared favorable. The investigator had been removed, his reputation damaged, the narrative already spreading. Why wouldn't he feel secure? Rachel faced the table again. "He doesn't know we're here." Again nobody spoke, because that statement mattered. A lot. The board investigation remained invisible, the harbor file remained confidential, and Brandon remained unaware of both, which meant he could still make mistakes, often the biggest mistakes. People became careless when they believed danger had passed. Michael looked toward Ulric. "There's one more thing." He opened the final folder. Inside sat a collection of metadata reports, digital fingerprints, system logs, technical records, the type of information most executives never understood. The type of information forensic investigators loved. Michael slid several pages forward. "The USB device." Ulric remained still. Michael continued. IT completed deeper analysis. Rachel looked surprised. When? 3 hours ago, Victoria leaned forward. What did they find? Michael's answer arrived immediately. The files were copied onto the device after business hours. Interesting, very interesting, he continued. 2 days before discovery, Rachel frowned. And? Michael turned another page. The originating workstation wasn't Ulric's. The room fell silent, completely silent, because everyone understood what that meant. The accusation forming the foundation of Friday's removal had just suffered a fatal wound. Rachel stared at the report, then read it again, then a third time, making absolutely certain. Finally, she placed the document down, carefully, deliberately, the way people handled evidence that changed everything. Victoria spoke first. Can it be challenged? Michael shook his head. Not realistically. The certainty in his voice mattered. He spent his career examining evidence. He wouldn't say it unless he believed it. Rachel folded her hands again, thinking, calculating, connecting pieces. The room remained quiet. Nobody interrupted. Nobody rushed her. After nearly a minute, she looked directly at Ulric. What do you want? The question surprised him, not because of the wording, because of who asked it. Most people in power assumed they already knew the answer. Rachel genuinely wanted to know. Ulric considered carefully, then answered honestly. The truth. No speech, no demand, no revenge, just truth. Rachel studied him, perhaps measuring sincerity, perhaps measuring character. Whatever she saw appeared to satisfy her. She nodded once, then turned toward Michael. Prepare the resolution. Victoria looked up. Michael already seemed to know what she meant. A folder appeared from his briefcase, prepared in advance. Interesting, very interesting. Rachel signed first, then passed the document. Michael signed. Victoria signed as witness. The paper moved across the table, finally stopping in front of Ulric Sanders. For the first time all evening he looked uncertain, not fearful, simply surprised. Rachel broke the silence. We reviewed your investigation. She tapped the signed document. We reviewed your conduct. Another tap. We reviewed the future needs of Operations Division. Then she slid the document toward him. The title appeared at the top. Appointment Resolution. Acting Division Head Operations. Effective immediately. The room became very quiet. Outside, rain continued falling across Chicago. Inside, 17 years of quiet work had led to a moment nobody at Summit Harbor Logistics would have believed possible. And yet Rachel Whitmore wasn't finished, because the most important decision of the evening had not been who would lead operations. The most important decision was how Monday morning would unfold, and Rachel already had a very specific plan. Ulric Sanders slept surprisingly well on Sunday night, not because the uncertainty had disappeared. It hadn't. Not because the investigation was finished. It wasn't. And certainly not because he suddenly felt powerful. That wasn't who he was. What allowed him to sleep was something simpler. The truth no longer depended on him alone. For months he had carried the harbor file almost entirely by himself. Every discrepancy, every record, every unanswered question. Now the evidence sat in the hands of people capable of acting on it. Whatever happened next would happen because of facts, not because of influence, not because of politics. Facts, that mattered. At 5:45 Monday morning, Ulric was already awake. Chicago remained dark outside his apartment windows. The city had not yet begun its daily rush. He brewed coffee, pressed his shirt, reviewed several documents, then looked once more at the appointment resolution Rachel Whitmore had given him. The paper sat neatly inside a folder on his dining table. Simple, official, powerful, acting division head operations, effective immediately. Even now it felt strange, not because he doubted the board's decision, because the position itself had never been part of his plan. Ulric never chased titles, never chased executive offices, never built alliances. His career had been built on competence, not ambition. Yet circumstances had changed, and the board had made its choice. At 7:05 a.m. he left his apartment. The same Honda Accord waited in its usual parking space. The same worn leather briefcase occupied the passenger seat. The same route carried him toward downtown Chicago. Everything looked familiar, yet this morning was different. Because less than 72 hours earlier, he had been escorted out of Summit Harbor Logistics as a suspected security risk. Today he was returning as something else entirely. The irony wasn't lost on him. Traffic remained light. The city slowly woke around him. Coffee shops opened. Delivery trucks moved through side streets. Commuters filled train platforms. A normal Monday morning, at least for most people. At 7:52 a.m., Ulric pulled into the Summit Harbor parking garage, level 3, spot 314. The same space, the same concrete walls, the same elevator. Nothing had changed. Yet when he entered the lobby moments later, the first sign appeared. The receptionist froze, not dramatically, just enough. A brief widening of the eyes, a moment of visible confusion. "Mr. Sanders?" Ulric nodded politely. "Good morning." The receptionist looked as though she wasn't entirely certain what reality she was currently experiencing, which was understandable. As far as most employees knew, Ulric Sanders no longer worked there. Rumors had traveled fast on Friday. Facts had not. He crossed the lobby calmly. No announcement, no attention-seeking. Just another man entering an office building. Several employees recognized him immediately. Their reactions varied. Confusion, curiosity, disbelief. One young analyst nearly dropped his coffee. Another whispered something to a colleague. Ulric ignored all of it. Speculation was inevitable. The truth would arrive soon enough. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, pressed the 22nd floor button, then waited. Floor by floor, 1, 5, 10, 15, 20. Finally, the doors opened. The executive level looked exactly as it had on Friday afternoon. Glass walls, polished floors, expensive artwork. The environment where reputations were created and destroyed. As Ulric walked toward the main conference suite, he noticed several familiar faces. Senior managers, operations directors, administrative staff. Most stared openly. Nobody understood why he was there. Not yet. At 8:07 a.m., another elevator arrived. Several executives stepped out. Among them was Brandon Mercer, perfect suit, perfect haircut, perfect confidence, at least initially. Brandon noticed Ulric almost immediately. The reaction was impossible to miss. A slight pause, a brief narrowing of the eyes, then something resembling amusement. From Brandon's perspective, the explanation seemed obvious. Perhaps Ulric had come to appeal his removal. Perhaps he wanted to clear his name. Perhaps he simply couldn't accept reality. Whatever Brandon believed, confidence remained visible. He approached. Not aggressively, not warmly. The way successful executives often approached people they believed no longer mattered. "Ulric." "Brandon." A short silence followed. Then Brandon smiled. The same polished smile that impressed investors. The same smile that had helped him climb the corporate ladder. "I wasn't expecting to see you this morning." Ulric met his gaze calmly. "I imagine not." Brandon slipped one hand into his pocket. "If you're here about Friday, human resources can probably help." The statement sounded helpful. It wasn't. It was intended as a reminder. A subtle demonstration of status. Brandon still believed he occupied the stronger position. Ulric simply nodded. "Thank you." Nothing more. No challenge, no argument, no hint of what was about to happen. The exchange ended when another elevator opened. Several additional executives emerged, then a final figure appeared. Rachel Whitmore, chairwoman of the board. The atmosphere changed immediately. Conversation stopped. People straightened. Attention shifted. Rachel rarely appeared on operational floors without reason, and when she did, people noticed. She crossed the hallway with calm confidence. Michael Grayson walked beside her. Several board representatives followed. Brandon's expression changed slightly. Not concern, interest. Whatever was happening clearly involved leadership, which aligned perfectly with his expectations. After all, many people expected Brandon Mercer to receive a significant promotion soon, perhaps even today. Rachel approached. Her eyes moved briefly toward Ulric, then toward the gathering executives. The hallway had become unusually quiet. Dozens of employees watched discreetly, some from offices, some from conference rooms, some pretending not to look. Rachel stopped beside Ulric, then did something nobody expected. Absolutely nobody. She smiled, not broadly, just enough, then extended her hand. "Good morning, Mr. Sanders." The hallway became completely silent. Brandon's smile disappeared, only slightly, but enough. Ulric shook her hand. "Good morning." Rachel turned toward the others. Several executives looked genuinely confused. A few seemed concerned. Most simply appeared lost. Michael Grayson stepped forward, holding a folder. The same folder signed inside the Palmer House conference suite less than 12 hours earlier. Rachel accepted it, then addressed the group. Her voice remained calm, professional, clear, yet every word carried weight. "As many of you know, Summit Harbor Logistics is currently conducting a board-directed review of operational leadership." No one interrupted. No one moved. Rachel continued. "Following that review, the board of directors has approved an immediate leadership appointment." A ripple of curiosity passed through the hallway. Several eyes moved toward Brandon. Naturally, he was the obvious candidate. Or at least he had been. Rachel opened the folder, removed a single document, then looked directly at Ulric Sanders. The pause lasted only seconds, yet it felt much longer. Finally, she spoke. "Effective immediately, Ulric Sanders will serve as acting division head of operations." Silence. Complete silence. The kind that arrives when reality collides with expectation. For one brief moment, nobody reacted. Nobody seemed capable of reacting. Because the statement made no sense according to the version of events everyone believed. Friday's disgraced compliance analyst. Monday's acting division head. The transformation was impossible. And yet Rachel Whitmore had just made it official. Ulric noticed many things in that moment. Shock, confusion, disbelief. But one reaction stood above all others. Brandon Mercer. For the first time since Ulric had known him, Brandon looked genuinely unprepared. Not defeated, not yet, but surprised, deeply surprised, because whatever Brandon expected Monday morning to bring, it certainly wasn't this. And Rachel Whitmore wasn't finished speaking, not even close. The silence inside the executive hallway lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. People looked from Rachel Whitmore to Ulric Sanders, then from Ulric to Brandon Mercer, then back again, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Corporate employees were accustomed to unexpected announcements. Leadership changes happened. Promotions happened. Restructuring happened. But this, a man escorted from the building on Friday, returning as acting division head on Monday. Nobody had seen that coming. Rachel Whitmore allowed the moment to settle, not for drama, for clarity. People needed time to absorb reality before hearing what came next. Eventually, she spoke again. "We have a division meeting scheduled for 8:30. Her voice remained calm, professional, controlled. "The entire operations leadership team will attend." No one objected. No one asked questions. When the chairwoman of the board issued instructions, compliance was immediate. The group slowly began moving toward the executive conference center. Employees whispered quietly. Managers exchanged confused glances. Rumors that had dominated the building for 3 days suddenly collapsed beneath the weight of a single announcement. Ulric walked beside Rachel and Michael Grayson. Not in front, not behind, beside. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. He noticed people noticing. That was enough. Inside the main conference room, nearly 40 managers had already gathered. Regional directors, operations executives, finance representatives, administrative leadership. Many had spent the weekend assuming Brandon Mercer was preparing for greater authority. Instead, they were about to receive very different news. The room gradually filled. Conversations remained subdued. Eyes followed Ulric. No one knew what to say. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Rachel stepped to the front. The room fell quiet immediately. A large screen behind her displayed the Summit Harbor Logistics logo. Nothing more. No presentations, no prepared talking points, just a blank beginning. Rachel looked across the room, then began. "As many of you know, the board of directors has been conducting a review of operations division leadership. Several people shifted in their seats. Others remained completely still. Rachel continued. The review remains active. Important wording. Not completed. Active, still moving, still developing. That distinction mattered, especially for Brandon Mercer. He sat 3 seats away from Ulric, expression composed, hands folded, listening carefully. Yet Ulric noticed something different, a slight tension around the eyes, the first visible crack. Rachel introduced Michael Grayson next. Michael stepped forward carrying several folders. His reputation alone commanded attention. People listened when Michael spoke because his career had been built on accuracy. Not politics, not popularity, accuracy. We have identified multiple operational concerns requiring immediate oversight. Again, careful language, no accusations, no conclusions, only facts. Michael looked toward Ulric. To ensure continuity and accountability, the board has appointed new interim leadership. A few managers already knew what was coming. Most did not. Michael continued. Effective immediately, Ulric Sanders will assume the role of acting division head. This time the reaction occurred inside the room itself. Small, contained, yet visible. Several executives exchanged glances. One regional manager nearly dropped his pen. Another stared openly at Ulric. Brandon remained still. Very still. Sometimes stillness revealed more than movement. Rachel then turned toward Ulric. The floor is yours. Every eye shifted. Again, waiting, expecting. Many assumed this was the moment. The victory speech, the public response, the retaliation, the humiliation of Brandon Mercer. That was how most people imagined power. Ulric imagined it differently. He stood, adjusted his jacket, then walked toward the front of the room. No dramatic pause, no performance, no attempt to dominate attention. When he spoke, his voice remained steady. Thank you. A simple beginning, nothing more. He looked around the room. Faces from years of meetings. People he had worked beside. People who barely noticed him. People who had avoided him on Friday. He felt no resentment, only focus. I understand many of you have questions. Several heads nodded. Now, everyone had questions. Ulric continued. There will be time for answers. Then came the sentence that immediately changed the atmosphere. But before there are answers, there must be facts. The room grew even quieter, because everyone understood the implication. Facts, not rumors, not assumptions, not narratives, facts. Ulric turned toward the large display screen behind him, still blank, still waiting, then faced the room once more. The board's review remains ongoing. He spoke carefully, deliberately. No conclusions have been finalized. Another important distinction. No conclusions, not yet. That protected the integrity of the process. It also protected everyone present, including Brandon, at least for now. Ulric continued. However effective, immediately several procedural changes will occur. He opened a folder, reviewed a single page, then read. All Operations Division data access will be audited. Several managers shifted slightly. Normal reaction. Audits created discomfort, even among honest people. All vendor approval authority will be temporarily reviewed. Another ripple moved through the room. Again, normal. Then came the most important instruction. Certain executive permissions will be suspended pending review. Silence. A different kind this time, sharper, more focused. Everyone understood what that meant. Someone's authority was about to change. The question was whose? Ulric looked toward Thomas Reed, Director of Security. Thomas sat near the rear of the room, expression unreadable, waiting. Rachel nodded once, a small signal, nothing more. Thomas immediately stood. Interesting. Very interesting. The coordination revealed preparation. The board had anticipated this moment. Thomas walked forward, carrying a sealed folder, not toward Ulric, toward Brandon Mercer. The room became absolutely silent. No whispers, no movement, nothing. Brandon's expression remained composed. Yet Ulric noticed the first true sign of concern, a tightening of the jaw, tiny, almost invisible. Thomas stopped beside him. Mr. Mercer. Brandon looked up. Yes. Thomas handed him this folder. For your review. Brandon accepted it, opened it, read silently. The room watched. Every person, every executive, every manager. Nobody looked away. For several seconds, Brandon revealed nothing. Then something changed. Not dramatically, not publicly. A subtle shift. The confident executive from Friday afternoon seemed suddenly less certain. Rachel spoke. Her tone remained professional. As part of the ongoing review, certain access privileges are being suspended. Brandon looked toward her. No longer relaxed. No longer comfortable. Rachel, surely this can be discussed privately. The request sounded reasonable. The timing did not. Rachel's response arrived immediately. The process is already underway. No emotion, no hostility, just finality. Brandon glanced toward Michael, then Victoria Hale, then back toward Rachel. Searching, evaluating, trying to understand. For perhaps the first time he seemed to realize the situation had moved beyond his control. Ulric watched quietly, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, simply observation. Because this moment wasn't about revenge, it was about process. The same process Brandon appeared confident enough to manipulate only 3 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. Rachel addressed the room once more. The review will continue. Then she looked toward Ulric. Mr. Sanders. A slight nod followed. Permission, instruction, both. Ulric understood. The next stage was beginning. He walked toward the control console connected to the conference room display. Several managers leaned forward, curiosity spreading rapidly, because everyone sensed something important was coming. Very important. The blank screen behind him flickered once, then powered on. A desktop appeared. Several folders became visible: audit records, security logs, metadata reports, evidence. The room grew even quieter, if that were possible, because whatever happened next would no longer depend on titles or opinions or reputation. It would depend entirely on information, and information had always been Ulric Sanders' strongest ally. The conference room felt different the moment the screen came to life. Until now, everything had been discussion, statements, announcements, procedural decisions. Now came something else, evidence, and evidence had a way of stripping emotion from a situation. Ulric Sanders stood beside the display. 40 managers and executives watched silently. Rachel Whitmore sat near the front. Michael Grayson reviewed a binder. Victoria Hale observed from the side of the room. Thomas Reed remained standing near the back wall. No one interrupted. No one spoke, because everyone understood what was about to happen. The screen displayed a timeline. Simple, clean, easy to follow, a sequence of dates stretching across several months. Ulric pointed toward the first entry. The purpose of this presentation is not to assign conclusions. He paused. The purpose is to review verifiable facts. Important distinction, always. Facts first, conclusions later. The first slide appeared. Vendor adjustments, operational reporting changes, approval sequences. Nothing sensational, just numbers. Rows and rows of numbers. Several managers relaxed slightly. They expected something more dramatic. That reaction was common. People underestimated data, until data started telling a story. Ulric moved to the next slide, then the next. Patterns emerged, repeated approval chains, repeated reporting shifts, repeated timing. What initially appeared random began looking structured, deliberate. Michael Grayson spoke from his seat. For those unfamiliar with audit methodology, repeated patterns often indicate systemic behavior. Several managers nodded. The explanation helped. Many people weren't financial specialists. They needed context. Ulric appreciated Michael's intervention. The presentation continued, vendor by vendor, contract by contract. Each section built upon the previous one. No accusations, only evidence. The room gradually became quieter, not because people were bored, because they were paying attention, really paying attention. Around 20 minutes into the presentation, Ulric reached the first critical section. The USB device. The same device that triggered Friday's public removal. The same device used to justify the accusations against him. A photograph appeared on screen. Several employees recognized it immediately. Rumors about the device had spread throughout the building. Ulric spoke calmly. This device was reportedly discovered inside my desk. Nobody disputed that, because it was true. He clicked forward. A forensic analysis report appeared. Technical, detailed, difficult to manipulate. Michael Grayson stood and joined him near the screen. The former auditor pointed toward a highlighted section. This report was completed by independent forensic analysts. Again, important, independent, not internal, not influenced, independent. Michael continued. The files on the device were copied 48 hours before discovery. Several people leaned forward. Brandon Mercer remained silent. Very silent. The report continued. Source workstation identification, access logs, transfer records, technical metadata, the digital fingerprints every file left behind. Michael pointed to another line. The originating workstation was not assigned to Mr. Sanders. Silence, complete silence. The statement landed heavily, because everyone immediately understood the implication. The foundation of Friday's accusation had just collapsed. One regional director raised a hand. Could the workstation have been shared? Reasonable question. Michael nodded. It was examined. Another click. More records appeared. The workstation belonged to an operations administrative terminal. Not compliance, operations. Interesting. Very interesting. Ulric noticed several managers glance toward Brandon. Nobody said anything. They didn't need to. The room was connecting dots on its own. The next slide appeared. Badge access records. Now people leaned forward even further, because this was one of the questions never answered during the original investigation. Who had access to Ulric's office? The screen displayed a timeline. Friday, Thursday, Wednesday. Dozens of employee entries. Then a highlighted section. Wednesday night, after business hours, an access event. Not unusual by itself, except for one detail. Ulric zoomed in. The name appeared. A senior operations coordinator, someone reporting indirectly through Brandon Mercer's division. Murmurs spread through the room, small, controlled, yet impossible to ignore. Rachel Whitmore immediately spoke. Let's allow the evidence to finish. The room fell quiet again. Professionalism returned. Ulric appreciated that. Premature conclusions damaged investigations. Facts deserved room to breathe. The presentation moved forward. Another record appeared, security footage request logs. This time, Thomas Reed stepped forward, for the first time all morning. The director of security looked uncomfortable, not defensive, uncomfortable. There is something I need to clarify. Every eye turned toward him. Thomas continued. On Thursday, a request was submitted to review hallway footage. Another slide appeared, timestamp included, verification included, everything documented. Rachel watched carefully. Thomas continued. The request was canceled before review. Silence. Then one manager asked the obvious question. Who canceled it? Thomas hesitated briefly, then answered. The cancellation originated from executive administrative authority. Interesting wording, very careful wording, but enough. Enough for everyone to understand. The room grew colder, not physically, emotionally. People were beginning to realize that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't poor communication. It wasn't procedural confusion. Someone had actively avoided evidence. That realization changed everything. Ulric advanced to the next section. Email records, the deleted message, recovered fragments, archived timestamps, nothing dramatic, just enough. The screen displayed the sentence recovered from company backups. I don't think we should keep moving these adjustments between reporting periods. The room stared at the words, simple, ordinary, damaging, because innocent accounting errors rarely generated conversations like that. The recovered message proved something important. Someone knew, someone objected, someone tried to raise concerns. The evidence kept building, layer by layer, like bricks forming a wall becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Then came the final section. Metadata, technical evidence, the type most people never noticed, the type Ulric loved, because metadata didn't care about titles, or charisma, or executive status. Metadata simply recorded what happened. The screen displayed a chain of digital events, file creation, modification, transfers, approvals, everything connected, everything timestamped, everything traceable. Michael Grayson walked to the screen again. This is the portion that concerned the board most. The room remained silent. Michael pointed toward a highlighted sequence. 3 accounts appeared. A vendor account, an operations review account, an administrative authorization account. Together they formed a chain, A pathway, a system. The pattern repeated across multiple transactions, multiple contracts, multiple months. Too many repetitions, too much consistency. One manager quietly whispered, "Oh my God." Nobody corrected him, because many people were thinking the same thing. At the center of the chain sat one name, not directly, not obviously, but repeatedly, Brandon Mercer. The room became absolutely still. Ulric did not speak. He didn't need to. The evidence was speaking for him. And unlike people, evidence rarely became emotional. Rachel Whitmore slowly stood. The timing felt deliberate. The presentation ended. The screen remained frozen on the final audit sequence. A visual summary of months of investigation. Rachel looked around the room, one executive at a time, one manager at a time, then finally toward Brandon. Her voice remained calm, professional, controlled, yet everyone could hear the steel underneath it. "The board has reviewed these findings." No one moved, no one interrupted. Rachel continued. "The review remains active." A pause. "But based on the evidence presented, immediate action is required." The room held its breath. Brandon finally spoke, for the first time in nearly an hour. "Rachel." She raised one hand, not aggressively, simply ending the interruption. And remarkably, Brandon stopped talking. Rachel turned toward Thomas Reed, a small nod, nothing more. Yet Thomas immediately understood. He stepped forward, carrying another folder, different from the previous one, thicker, more formal, prepared, waiting. The room watched. Every eye followed him. Thomas stopped beside Brandon Mercer's chair, then placed the folder on the table, carefully, deliberately, the same way security officers had once placed documents in front of Ulric Sanders. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, especially Ulric. Because for the first time since Friday afternoon, the balance of power inside Summit Harbor Logistics had shifted completely, and everyone in the room could feel it. The folder remained unopened for several seconds. Brandon Mercer stared at it. The conference room remained silent. 40 people watched. No one pretended otherwise anymore. Whatever happened next mattered. A lot. The confidence Brandon carried into the room had not vanished completely. But it had changed. The certainty was gone. The effortless control was gone. For the first time, he looked like a man reacting instead of directing. Thomas Reed stepped back, professional, neutral. The folder remained where he had placed it, waiting. Rachel Whitmore folded her hands. "Please review the document." Her voice remained calm. No anger, no triumph, just procedure. Brandon slowly opened the folder. The pages inside carried the Summit Harbor Board seal. Official, immediate, not something prepared in a hurry, which meant the decision had been made before the meeting began. Another realization, another shift. Ulric watched quietly, not with satisfaction, not with revenge, only observation, the same way he had observed everything for months. Brandon read the first page, then the second, then the third. His expression hardened. One manager near the back shifted uncomfortably. Another stared down at the conference table. Nobody wanted to be the center of attention during moments like these. Rachel finally spoke. "Pending completion of the board investigation, your executive authority is suspended." The words landed heavily, because everyone understood exactly what they meant. No approval authority, no system control, no operational oversight, no executive power. For a man who built his career around influence, the loss was enormous. Brandon looked up. This is a mistake." His voice remained controlled, but only barely. Rachel did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to sit in the room, then answered. "That possibility was considered." The reply felt surgical. Neither emotional nor defensive, simply precise. Brandon turned toward Michael Grayson. "You can't seriously believe this presentation proves anything." Michael met his gaze calmly. "No." The answer surprised several people. Brandon appeared briefly encouraged. Then Michael continued. "The presentation didn't prove anything." A pause. "The forensic reviews did." The encouragement disappeared instantly. Several executives exchanged glances, because everyone knew Michael Grayson's reputation. He wasn't a man who exaggerated evidence. If he said the reviews mattered, they mattered. Brandon attempted another approach. The investigation isn't complete, Rachel nodded. Correct. Then how can you suspend me? Rachel's answer arrived immediately. The same way your organization suspended Mr. Sanders. The room became very quiet, painfully quiet, because the comparison was impossible to ignore. Friday, Monday, 2 investigations, 2 suspensions, 1 crucial difference, evidence. Ulric noticed several managers looking away. Many had remained silent during his removal. Now they were witnessing the consequences of that silence, not because they were guilty, because they finally understood how quickly assumptions could become actions. Brandon closed the folder, slowly, carefully, trying to regain control, trying to regain footing. Rachel, I'd like to speak privately. No. The answer came immediately. No hesitation, no discussion, just no. That seemed to affect him more than anything else, because people accustomed to influence often expected negotiation. Rachel was offering none. Thomas Reed stepped forward again, not aggressively, not dramatically, just professionally. As part of the suspension process, we need your access credentials. Silence. Several people visibly shifted in their seats. The symmetry was impossible to miss. Friday afternoon, Ulric surrendering his badge. Monday morning, Brandon receiving the same instruction. Life occasionally possessed a sense of irony. Brandon remained seated. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then slowly he removed his executive access card, placed it on the table. Next came his company phone, then his building credentials, one item after another, exactly as procedure required, exactly as Ulric had done. The room watched quietly. No one celebrated. No one smiled. Moments like this rarely felt victorious. They felt consequential, very consequential. Eventually Brandon stood. He adjusted his jacket, looked around the room, perhaps searching for support, perhaps searching for allies, perhaps searching for certainty. Ulric couldn't know. What he did know was simple. Nobody spoke, nobody intervened, nobody challenged the board. Not because everyone believed Brandon guilty, because everyone understood the process had moved beyond personal opinions. The evidence would decide. Not popularity, not charisma, evidence. Rachel finally spoke. You'll receive formal instructions from outside counsel. Brandon nodded once. No reply, no argument, no speech, just a nod. Then he turned toward the exit. The walk across the conference room felt strangely familiar. Ulric recognized the feeling immediately, because 3 days earlier he had walked a similar path. Different circumstances, different reasons, same silence, same eyes watching, same uncertainty. Brandon left the room. The door closed behind him. For several moments nobody spoke. The absence itself felt significant, like a storm passing through and leaving stillness behind. Finally, Rachel addressed the group. The investigation will continue. Professional, measured, focused. The findings presented today are preliminary. Again, important wording, preliminary. The board remained disciplined. They refused to overstate conclusions. That discipline impressed Ulric, because strong cases didn't require exaggeration. Facts carried enough weight on their own. The meeting gradually shifted toward operational matters, interim reporting structures, temporary authority transfers, audit procedures, necessary details. Yet something had fundamentally changed, not just inside the conference room, across the entire company. Word spread quickly, faster than any official announcement. By lunchtime, employees throughout Summit Harbor knew something extraordinary had happened. The man removed on Friday had returned as division head. The executive once considered untouchable had been suspended. Nobody could talk about anything else. Meanwhile, external consequences began arriving. At 1:15 p.m., Prairie Crest Foods requested an immediate review meeting, one of Summit Harbor's largest clients. Their legal department wanted explanations, detailed explanations. That mattered, because clients rarely requested legal reviews unless concerns were serious. At 2:40 p.m. outside, forensic auditors arrived, independent specialists. Rachel had already authorized them. Another important signal. The board wasn't trying to bury the issue. They were expanding the investigation, making it harder to manipulate, harder to influence, harder to hide. Emily Carter learned about the developments shortly before 3 o'clock. Ulric happened to see her later that afternoon. She looked nervous, almost guilty. as though she somehow contributed to the chaos. She hadn't. Ulric understood that immediately. "Emily," she stopped. "Mr. Sanders." The title still sounded strange. He noticed, so did she. After a brief pause, she asked, "Is this because of the spreadsheet?" The question carried genuine concern. Ulric considered carefully, then answered honestly. "The spreadsheet helped." She lowered her eyes. "I never meant—" "I know." The interruption was gentle, not harsh, not dismissive, simply true. "You did your job." Emily looked relieved, not completely, but enough. Many people inside large organizations convinced themselves that noticing problems created trouble. The reality was often the opposite. Ignoring problems created trouble. People noticing them created solutions. Ulric hoped she would remember that. As afternoon became evening, more information continued arriving. New witnesses, additional records, expanded audit findings. The investigation was growing, not shrinking, which meant the board's concerns had been justified, perhaps even understated. Around 6 o'clock, Ulric stood alone inside his new office, the office previously assigned to the division head. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River. The view was impressive, yet he barely noticed it. His attention remained on the reports covering his desk. The work ahead felt enormous: months of review, potential legal exposure, operational restructuring, client confidence, employee trust. None of it would be fixed quickly, and despite everything that had happened, Ulric understood something important. Removing one executive wasn't the victory. Repairing the system was. That would be much harder, much slower, and far more important. Outside the windows, evening settled over Chicago. Traffic lights illuminated the streets below. The city moved forward, as cities always did. Inside Summit Harbor Logistics, however, a different chapter was beginning. One that would require more than investigations, more than suspensions, more than evidence. It would require rebuilding trust. And that challenge would start first thing tomorrow morning. The first week was harder than the investigation. Ulric Sanders expected resistance. He expected paperwork. He expected legal reviews and endless meetings. What he didn't expect was how much damage uncertainty had already caused. People were still showing up to work. Freight was still moving across the country. Clients were still placing orders. From the outside, Summit Harbor Logistics looked stable. Inside, however, trust had been fractured, and trust was harder to repair than any financial report. Tuesday morning began at 6:30 a.m. Ulric sat alone in his new office reviewing operational summaries. The office itself still felt unfamiliar. A larger desk, better furniture, a view of the Chicago River. None of it mattered much to him. What mattered sat inside the reports spread across the desk. Employee turnover, vendor relationships, client retention numbers, internal complaints, operational delays. The deeper he looked, the clearer the picture became. The problems extended beyond Brandon Mercer. Not corruption, culture. For years, people had learned to stay quiet, not because they were dishonest, because speaking up seemed pointless. Emily Carter's experience proved it. She had noticed discrepancies, raised concerns, and been told to leave them alone. That should never have happened, yet it had, which meant the system needed more than new leadership. It needed new habits. At 8:00 a.m., Ulric held his first division-wide leadership meeting. Regional directors joined by video conference. Department managers filled the room. The atmosphere remained cautious. People were still trying to understand him. Many had spent years barely noticing him. Now he sat at the head of the table. Life changed quickly. Perceptions changed even faster. Ulric began simply, "No speeches today." Several managers looked surprised. Good. He wasn't interested in speeches. "I'm interested in problems." That got their attention. A few managers exchanged glances. Then he continued, "If something isn't working, I want to know." Silence, normal. People conditioned to stay quiet rarely became outspoken overnight. Ulric expected that, so he changed the approach. Instead of asking for opinions, he asked for specifics: delivery delays, vendor disputes, inventory bottlenecks, data access issues, one problem at a time. Gradually, the room began participating. People felt safer discussing operational problems than political ones. That was fine. Trust grows through consistency, not declarations. By the end of the meeting, a list covered the screen. 37 separate operational concerns. Many had existed for months, some for years. Nobody had addressed them properly. Ulric wasn't shocked. Organizations often tolerated dysfunction longer than outsiders realized, especially when results looked acceptable on the surface. Later that week, another important decision was announced. A confidential reporting system, independent, protected, anonymous if necessary. Employees could report concerns without routing them through operational leadership. Rachel Whitmore approved the program personally. So did the board. The announcement generated immediate reaction. Not publicly, quietly. Employees began submitting reports, some small, some insignificant, a few extremely useful. Patterns emerged. The same way patterns always emerged when people finally felt safe enough to speak. One afternoon, Michael Grayson reviewed several submissions with Ulric. The veteran auditor sat across the desk, reading carefully, occasionally making notes. Finally, he looked up. "Interesting," Ulric nodded. "What?" Michael tapped a page. "People knew more than we thought." That didn't surprise Ulric. Organizations always contained observers. People noticed things. The challenge was convincing them their observations mattered. Now they were speaking, and the information kept arriving. Meanwhile, outside auditors continued reviewing financial records. The findings became increasingly troubling. Additional contract irregularities emerged. More questionable approvals surfaced. Several vendors received subpoenas from outside investigators. The scope continued expanding. Brandon Mercer remained suspended. Eventually, he resigned. The announcement arrived through legal counsel. Short, formal, predictable. No public explanation accompanied it. The board preferred facts to speculation. Investigations continued. Outcomes would arrive later. What mattered now was recovery. Recovery required leadership. Not headlines, not revenge. Leadership. One Friday afternoon, nearly a month after the original incident, Ulric walked through the operations floor. Employees were working normally, phones ringing, meetings occurring, freight reports updating. The atmosphere felt different, lighter, not perfect, better. A young analyst stopped him unexpectedly. "Mr. Sanders." Ulric turned. The employee looked nervous. "Yes." The analyst hesitated, then spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you." Ulric frowned slightly. "For what?" The analyst smiled awkwardly. "For making people listen." Then he walked away before elaborating. The exchange lasted less than 20 seconds, yet it stayed with Ulric longer than most executive meetings, because it captured the real issue. People wanted to be heard, not praised, not promoted, heard. The lesson influenced many decisions that followed. Promotion reviews changed, performance evaluations changed, reporting structures changed. The old culture rewarded visibility. The new one emphasized accountability. Gradually, results improved. Not instantly. Nothing meaningful improves instantly, but steadily, quarter by quarter, month by month. Clients noticed, employees noticed, the board noticed. Prairie Crest Foods eventually renewed its contract, a major victory, not because of revenue, because of trust returning. One afternoon, Rachel Whitmore visited the office unexpectedly, something she rarely did. Ulric met her inside the conference room overlooking the river. Rachel reviewed several reports, then set them aside. "You know something," Ulric waited. "When this started, many board members expected collapse." Interesting. He hadn't known that. Rachel continued. "They thought operations was too damaged. And now," a rare smile appeared, "now they're asking how you did it." Ulric almost laughed. Almost, because the answer felt simple, painfully simple. "We listened." Rachel nodded slowly, as though confirming a conclusion she already reached herself. The meeting ended shortly afterward. No ceremony, no congratulations, just work, exactly how Ulric preferred it. That evening he left the office later than usual. The building had mostly emptied. Hallways stood quiet, lights dimmed automatically in unused sections. As he walked toward the elevators, he passed a familiar location. The executive conference room where everything changed, where the evidence had been presented, where Brandon's authority ended, where his own unexpected chapter began. He paused briefly, only briefly, then continued walking, not because the moment lacked significance, because he understood something important. The future mattered more than the victory. Always. As he reached the lobby, another memory surfaced. Friday afternoon, security officers, whispers, humiliation, the revolving doors opening, the feeling of uncertainty. The image remained clear, yet it no longer carried weight, not because he forgot it, because he understood it. The experience had revealed weaknesses inside the system, weaknesses now being repaired, and that made the discomfort worthwhile. Outside evening settled over Chicago. Traffic flowed through downtown streets. The city moved steadily forward, just as Summit Harbor Logistics was beginning to do. But one final chapter still remained, because 6 months later, Ulric Sanders would walk through this same building again, past the same lobby, past the same security desk, past the same doors, and in that ordinary moment he would realize how much had changed, and how much of him had stayed exactly the same. 6 months later, Chicago looked exactly the same. The river still cut through downtown like a silver ribbon. The elevated trains still rattled across steel tracks. Morning traffic still clogged the streets near the Loop. And every weekday at 6:45 a.m., a 12-year-old Honda Accord still pulled into the Summit Harbor Logistics parking garage, Level 3, Spot 314. Some habits survived promotions. Ulric Sanders preferred it that way. The company had changed dramatically during the previous 6 months. Ulric had changed very little. The Honda remained. The worn leather briefcase remained. Even Harbor Deli remained part of his routine. Every morning he still ordered black coffee and an egg sandwich. The owner no longer seemed surprised when executives occasionally stopped by looking for him. Word had spread. People knew who Ulric Sanders was now, at least professionally, yet recognition never interested him. Results did, and the results had become difficult to ignore. Operations performance reached its strongest numbers in nearly 5 years. Client retention improved, employee turnover declined, internal reporting increased, audit findings decreased. For the first time in a long time, Summit Harbor Logistics felt stable, not because problems disappeared, because people addressed them. That was the difference. Problems existed in every organization. The dangerous ones were the problems nobody felt safe discussing. At 7:58 a.m., Ulric entered the main lobby. The receptionist smiled, not because of his title, because she genuinely liked him. A small distinction, an important one. "Morning, Mr. Sanders." "Morning, Lisa." The exchange lasted only seconds, yet 6 months earlier, it would have been impossible. Back then, the receptionist barely knew his name. Now everyone did. The elevator arrived. Several employees stepped inside. A young logistics analyst, a procurement manager, 2 operations coordinators. They greeted him naturally, comfortably, the way people greet someone they trust, not someone they fear. Ulric preferred that. Fear produced silence. Trust produced information, and information solved problems. The elevator climbed toward the executive floors. As it rose, memories surfaced. Not dramatic memories, specific ones. Friday afternoon, security officers, a cardboard box, the feeling of cold rain outside the building. The image remained vivid, yet it felt distant now, like something that happened to another version of himself. Not because he forgot it, because time had transformed it into perspective. The elevator doors opened. 22nd floor, the same floor where everything changed. Ulric stepped into the hallway. Employees moved through their morning routines. Meetings started, phones rang, work continued, normal, productive, healthy, exactly what he wanted. Halfway down the corridor, he passed the conference room where the evidence presentation occurred. The room sat empty at the moment. Sunlight streamed through glass walls. Nothing about it appeared significant. Yet he paused briefly, only for a second. The room represented more than a turning point. It represented proof. Proof that facts still mattered. Proof that patience still mattered. Proof that systems sometimes worked when people were willing to use them correctly. Then he continued walking. No ceremony, no nostalgia, just another step forward. Inside his office, the morning schedule waited. Vendor reviews, regional updates, quarterly planning, nothing glamorous. Real leadership rarely looked glamorous. Most of it involved listening, reviewing, deciding, then listening again. At 9:00 a.m., Rachel Whitmore arrived for a scheduled board update. She visited more frequently these days, not because she lacked confidence, because transparency had become part of the culture. Rachel entered carrying several reports. The two reviewed operational metrics together: client satisfaction, financial performance, employee feedback. The numbers looked strong, very strong. Eventually, Rachel set the reports aside. "You know what surprised me most?" Ulric looked up. "What?" Rachel smiled faintly. "The employee surveys." "Interesting answer." "Why?" She tapped a page. "Trust scores." Ulric glanced at the report. Employee trust in leadership had increased substantially, not overnight, gradually, consistently. Rachel continued. "People believe someone will actually listen now." The statement remained in the room for several moments, because it mattered. Perhaps more than revenue, more than efficiency. People willing to speak honestly created stronger organizations. Ulric understood that. The board understood it now too. After Rachel left, the day continued normally. Meetings, reports, decisions, hours passed. The work never stopped. That was another lesson leadership taught him. There was no finish line, only responsibility. Later that afternoon, he received an email from Emily Carter. No emergency, no concern, just a promotion announcement. She had accepted a new role within financial controls, a well-deserved advancement. Ulric smiled slightly while reading it. Emily never intended to become part of a major investigation. She simply paid attention. Sometimes that was enough. The email reminded him how many people contributed to the outcome. Not heroes, not villains, people, ordinary people making small decisions, choosing whether to stay silent, choosing whether to speak. Those choices shaped everything. By evening, most employees had left the building. The city outside glowed beneath the setting sun. Chicago's skyline reflected across the river. The view remained impressive. Yet Ulric still found himself looking more often at reports than windows. Some habits survived success. At 6:12 p.m. he gathered his things. The same briefcase, the same car keys, the same routine. As he walked toward the elevators, he passed the lobby level once again. Security officers stood near the entrance, different officers than 6 months earlier. One nodded respectfully. Ulric nodded back. Then something unexpected happened. A newer employee approached him. Perhaps 25 years old, nervous, unsure. "Mr. Sanders?" "Yes." The young man hesitated, then spoke. "I started here 3 months ago." Ulric waited. The employee smiled. "I heard the story." Which story didn't need clarification. The story had become part of company history. The young man continued. "They said you came back on Monday." Ulric almost laughed. Almost. "They tell it differently every time." The employee grinned. "Probably." Then he became serious. "But people say you didn't fight back." "Interesting observation," the young man continued. "They said you waited." Ulric considered the statement, then nodded. "I did." The employee seemed to think about that, then quietly replied, "That was smart." Perhaps, perhaps not. The truth felt simpler. He hadn't waited because he was smart. He waited because facts required time. The employee thanked him and walked away. The conversation lasted less than a minute, yet it stayed with Ulric as he crossed the lobby. Outside, evening air greeted him. The city hummed with life. Traffic moved steadily. People hurried toward restaurants, trains, and homes. Normal life. Good life. He walked toward the parking garage. Level 3, spot 314. The same Honda Accord waited exactly where it always had. Some executives drove luxury cars. Some collected status symbols. Ulric never saw the point. The Honda still worked. That was enough. He placed his briefcase inside. Started the engine, then paused for a moment. Not because he was thinking about Brandon Mercer. Brandon's resignation had become old news. Outside investigations continued. The outcome belonged to lawyers and regulators now, not to him. No. The thought occupying his mind was much simpler. 6 months earlier, he had left this building carrying a cardboard box. Certain people believed his career was finished. Today he left carrying the same worn briefcase he always carried, the same man, different door, different title, different responsibility, but fundamentally the same man. The engine started. The garage lights reflected across the windshield. Then Ulric Sanders drove into the Chicago evening, leaving behind a company that had changed because someone chose patience over panic, evidence over anger, and truth over noise. Every story like this eventually stops being about promotions, investigations, or corporate titles. It becomes about choices. Ulric Sanders never won because he was louder than everyone else. He never won because he had more power, better connections, or a more impressive title. For months, he simply kept collecting facts when it would have been easier to react emotionally. He stayed focused when others wanted him distracted. And when the moment came, the truth spoke louder than any argument ever could. Most of us will never sit inside a boardroom at a billion-dollar company, but many of us know what it feels like to be underestimated. We know what it feels like when people assume we are weak because we stay quiet. We know what it feels like when someone with more influence, more confidence, or a louder voice seems impossible to challenge. This story is a reminder that patience is not weakness. Preparation is not fear. Sometimes the strongest move is refusing to react until the facts are ready. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had all the power? Have you ever chosen patience instead of anger and watched it pay off later? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might encourage someone else who is going through a difficult situation right now. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is about another ordinary person who was counted out too early and how one unexpected decision changed everything.